Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. Today I wanted to do some earrings and I thought I'd do something simple but elegant, and I picked out some green onyx. I think it's been dyed because I don't think there's any actual green onyx of this sort, but it's pretty nonetheless. So we'll give it a try and see how it turns out. It's probably going to be a nice beginner project. So if you haven't done an open back bezel for a cabochon, it might be a good one to try on your first one. All right, let's get started. So this is one of my design idea sketchbooks that are available on my merch store. This model has ring sizing information, including a ring chart on the back. Some of the other ones have conversion charts like gauge to millimeters to inches. There's one that has saw blade sizes used for particular thicknesses of silver and stuff like that. So there's a bunch of different ones with lots of useful information. So check it out. I like them because it gives me a place to keep track of my projects in. Since I started the channel, I filled up about 5 of these with projects that I can go back and revisit at some time if I want to remember how I did it, because I certainly don't remember how I did each thing. But it's got a nice dot matrix in the background, which helps me to draw better pictures. So get yourself one or two. They're a great way to keep a record of what's going on. So here's what I got going today. I was going to do a simple kind of a biggish pear-shaped or a teardrop-shaped cabochon. I picked out some of this green onyx. I have 2 of them actually here. These are fun because they're not exactly the same. They do share the whole stripiness and the various color banding. So I think it's kind of fun that they're not exactly the same. But so we're going to be doing that, and I'll make a bezel out of 3/16 inch fine silver bezel strip that's 26 gauge, and that's 0.41 thick by 4.76 millimeters tall. I will likely file down the top a little bit because these don't need to have it that tall. I'm going to create a step on the inside with 18 gauge round wire so that we have some light going through the stone, because it does allow some light. It's translucent and almost transparent in a couple of spots. So I think that'll make it look prettier. And 18 gauge is 1 millimeter round wire. This is going to be 14 gauge round, and that's going to be 1.6 millimeters. 16 gauge round is 1.3 millimeters, and this is 20 gauge round, which has been I actually make it from 18 gauge by pulling it through a draw plate and not annealing it afterwards, so it's nice and stiff. And 20 gauge is 0.8 millimeters. And I think that's pretty much everything. So sometimes when I'm doing earrings, I do one first to see how it looks, and that's what I did today. So this is this one here, and what we'll do is we'll recreate it in the second one so you can watch me make it. And I don't remember which one of these I used, honestly, but that's how it's going to look eventually, hanging from an ear wire that we'll make out of 20 gauge. So. But you can see that the bezel is a little bit high, so I'll need to file that down a bit before we set these, and polish them, of course. But let's get started. We'll make a bezel for one of these here. I think that one fit in there pretty good. They're both pretty similar in size. I think this fits a little bit better. So we'll do one for this one here. We'll start by filing this as flat as we can. If you want to use a miter vise jig, that helps when you're new at this, especially. I had trouble filing a straight line when I first started. You can brace it against something if that helps you too. After a while you get pretty good at it. At least I have days where I'm really good at it, and then other days where I'm not so good at it. So when you're doing a bezel for something that has a point on it, it's never a good idea to have the 2 ends meet at the point, because it makes it harder there when the solder flows and sticks them together, and it's going to be hard to shape there. So we want that to be an easy place to shape. And these ones are particularly not very sharp. So I want it to be kind of a rounded corner there. So we're not going to have the ends meet right there. We'll have them meet on the side somewhere. So I think I'm going to start by curving this just a little bit, because these are kind of curved, right? Like that. Okay, and then in order to get that curved kind of bend there, let's use these bail making pliers. So you can kind of get at least a rough version of that shape there. Doesn't have to be perfect, I don't suppose. Once you get it in there, which I think I got it pretty close. Hopefully you can see that. Then I can wrap it as tight as I can around there. Once I have that as tight as I can, make a little scratch on the outside, just a bit beyond where they meet. Probably about as thick as the width of that wire, maybe 1 millimeter. And that's where we'll cut it off. If you're new to my channel, here's some information about my solder and my flux and my torch. That's not to say you couldn't do this with different kinds of solder and flux and torch that I have. That's just what I use. So I'm going to actually kind of make this sort of into a more angular shape, but I'm going to leave that that curved corner there kind of. I just want to be able to set a nice piece of solder on the top of this. But we need to file that edge a little bit first. So we'll get that kind of pushing together tightly. That's important because under the heat it's going to relax a little bit. And if it does that, it may pull apart if it's not pushing together. So it's advantageous to have it pushing together. One of the things that people ask me all the time is, why do I keep having this bezel where it's soldered in the middle but there's a crack on the top and the bottom? And that's usually because they've kept the heat on there just a little bit too long. Once it gets to the flow point, if you leave the heat on there for too much longer, it's going to slightly pull apart. And a lot of times the solder at the edge on either side, on the edge, will move towards the center and it'll leave a crack there as it kind of pulls apart slightly. So it'll be soldered in the middle with a crack on either side. So if you have that problem, try and get the heat off as soon as your solder flows, and that'll resolve most of that. I could have done a little better job of getting that parallel with the pad. See if I can get it to stay on there without it sliding off over and over again. Oh, come on. Sometimes the flux is kind of sticky when you heat it a little bit. Then it'll act like a way to anchor something somewhere like that, a piece of solder. There we go. See how I didn't hang around there much longer after it flowed? That's where you get into trouble usually. So let's just see if we can't reshape this a little bit. When I'm reshaping a bezel like this, I find that being kind of gentle with it is usually the best bet. Just slight pinches here and there, kind of reshape it. I usually tell people who are beginners to not get too frustrated until they've made about 30 bezels. At that point, things start to become pretty routine. And then you have fewer and fewer problems after that. It just becomes pretty easy. So don't lose hope. You'll get there. One of the comments I get is, "You make soldering look really easy, Chad." It does get easier with practice, so keep practicing. You'll start to get a feel for where the heat needs to go and how long you need to leave it there, and if you're having a problem, what's causing the problem. As long as you stop and think about that when something goes south, you know, it helps to have a little a little stop and think about your life choices. In this case, about your soldering choices. It just has to do with some of those. You have to keep track of how far your torch is away from things. You have to keep track of moving it around all the time. You want to keep the tip of the flame real close to the metal to heat it most efficiently. You're watching the solder, you're watching the metal, trying to do a number of different things all at once, and until you've done it enough to where you don't have to think about those things, it seems a little bit overwhelming. So once you've gotten your brain to just do those automatically, then all of a sudden it's much easier. So, okay, so we need to get this to fit in there. Again, this doesn't come to a sharp point, so I'm going to not meet these at the point. I'm going to put them somewhere over here, and we'll just kind of try and do what I did with the bezel there a little bit. This is an easy way to make an open back bezel. Some people put a sheet on the back and then cut it out. I never thought that was as neat of a way as doing it this way. Don't come at me just because that's the way you do it. There's nothing wrong with it. I get a cleaner look with a piece of wire than I do when I saw something out because I'm not that great at sawing. So we're getting in the ballpark here. So I'm going to make a mark on here and cut it just a little bit long. And we'll see how it looks. I'd rather cut it long so that I can cut it a little bit shorter if I need to, than to cut it too short in the first go. See, I'm having trouble getting it over that, and it's actually even overlapped a little bit, so I'm going to take a little bit more off. Just a skosh. Kind of malformed my bezel by doing that. See if we can't get it back into shape a little better. Now we're talking. If you don't get it relatively tight, you'll end up with a little gap between the two wires. And while that isn't a project-ending problem, it does look a little neater if you cannot have that. It is the back of the piece, so if it happens, it might not be worth trying to fix unless you really, if it's really going to bother you. Okay, the other thing is you want to make sure it's in a flat plane so that it lays right at the bottom like that. And I think let's go ahead and solder that in. Let's take a couple pieces of this solder. This is hard silver sheet solder that I cut earlier for that first one. Just a few pieces of it. Okay, so I'm going to flux it and dry the flux, and then we'll position it over the top of those and see if we can't get a nice seam all the way around. Come on. There we go. We want to be touching the wire and the bezel itself if we can. That way, when it does flow, once they both reach that temperature, it should stick to both of them. See how just on the front there, kind of sucked up in there? And they just pull up in. Pretty slick way. Huh? Sometimes I file these flat on the bottom before I go any further, but I didn't on the first one, so I'm not going to on this one. I'll just file them flat after we're done. Pretty snug, that's good. Okay, so let's take a look at the picture here. Got this part made. We need to make the circle now, and we want to cut it so it meets the sides pretty nicely. So I think let's make the circle all the way around. I figured out about how long of a piece I needed, and it was about 75.36 millimeters. Easy way to find the circumference of a circle is measure from the outside edge to the outside edge straight through the center, the diameter, and multiply that times pi, and that'll get you pretty close. So I actually cut these about 80 millimeters just so I have some extra to work with. And I think what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and shape it around the ring mandrel, kind of near the top. That way, as we slide it up the ring mandrel, it'll maintain that shape, that nice round shape. So my mess over here is getting out of control. I had two big shows in pretty rapid succession, so I haven't had much time to clean. That's going to be my excuse. Okay. So whenever you slide it down the mandrel, it's going to stretch it a little bit. But when I move it backwards to take it off, it's going to spring back a skosh. So I'm just going to keep pushing it a little bit further and pulling it off so it stretches it out until it actually matches that. Just a little bit more. That's pretty good, I think. See if I can find that T-pin I was using a minute ago. Try and hold this in place, and then I'm just going to scratch a thin line along the outside edge of this. So I have kind of a rough idea where to cut that, and then we'll file it. Sometimes it's nice to make one earring first, that way you have another one to just copy. For me, to get them to be similar, sometimes it makes it a little bit easier. So here's what I'm thinking. What if we put these back to back like that? That'll help me to know where to connect this wire on the second one. There. That's pretty close. I'm probably going to file them just a little bit, and then at that point, well, I think we'll be able to solder them then. Tiny bit more. Alright, I'm going to cut a little more solder because I used up most of the stuff that was on the pad. So I'm going to do something called pick soldering here. You don't have to do this. I just find it's an easy way to get solder where I want it to go. So if you're interested in learning how to do it, I'll put a link right there for you. It's one of those skills that kind of really improved what I could do and widened what I could do. It's like bezels. It takes a little bit of practice to get your timing right. But once you do, it really makes it so you can put things together quickly. So those of you who are feeling like it takes forever to make something, this is one of those things that speeds up your process. It also makes it easier to get just exactly the amount of solder you want in place where you want it pretty effectively. So if you don't know how to fix solder, you could just lean a little piece of solder in there, or you could use some paste solder or something like that, I suppose. Okay, let's see if we got this relatively symmetrical. I think it's going to be good enough, close enough to where nobody will notice much of the difference there. And let's add a jump ring into this one, and then really we just need to pickle them. And I'll polish them, and then we can set the stone together. I may set one of the stones just to save time, but I'm going to position the crack and the jump ring right up against there. Sometimes I solder the jump ring closed beforehand, just to make sure that we have some solder in place there. But you don't have to do that. You can if you want. One of the things that beginners struggle with too is dealing with the disparity in mass between things you're trying to solder together. For instance, this one here, this little tiny jump ring has very little mass, but the ring down here and this bezel have accumulated quite a bit of mass comparatively, and so it takes longer to heat those up, whereas the little tiny ring heats up pretty quickly if you focus the heat on it. So we're going to spend more time on the bigger chunk than the little chunk, and then when I think it's about time, it's going to move in there and get the two both to reach that flow temperature and solder them together. So you can see why I'd call this an easy project in general. It's not a lot of steps to it. So let's let that pickle for a while, and I'll be back and we can set the stone. Okay, like I said, after I polished, I went ahead and set one of the stones. I do this a little differently than some. I use the flat side of my chain nose pliers as a bezel pusher to start with. So I'll just be kind of pushing that down. I filed this down to the height I felt was appropriate for these, which is just enough to get a grab on that curve. A lot of times people aren't able to do this where I'm holding it in two hands and have enough force to push this down, but if you don't, it's a good idea maybe to secure the piece you're working on in a vise of some sort. That way you can bear down pretty hard and get that pushed down nice. Go ahead and burnish, and to do that I use the rounded outer part of these and just rub that top edge. Okay, I already turned this one into a French hook. If you're interested in making these ear wires, here's a link to show you how I did that. I'll go ahead and show you the rest of doing this. I'm just going to make sure this is kind of lined up straight. And then I'm going to hold it so I'm looking at the back. Push this wire forward just a little bit there. I usually use a pen or a round pencil as the part to create the little loop for your earlobe. And I'm pushing in with my finger a little bit like that to give it kind of that shape. So I usually cut them off just a little bit below where the loops are on the earrings. End it up like that a little bit. And then I'll use either a cup burr or a file to kind of like clean up those ends and make them smooth. So I will also take the Dremel with a fine polishing bit, a silicone abrasive bit, the blue ones, and clean up that top edge just a little bit to make it look smooth. But that's kind of what I had in mind. So those will make nice earrings. Someone will love those. Okay, I'll get some better pictures at the end. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you might have done different. I always love to hear people's ideas. So leave a comment. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the elegant but simple earrings. And if you did, it'd be great if you hit the like button before you left. And I'd also love it if you leave a comment and visit my main YouTube channel page, because I have lots of videos over there. And if you like this one, there's certainly going to be some other ones that you'll like too. I have over 660 last I counted. There's tons of projects, so check it out, watch a few, and then I'd really like it if you'd subscribe to my channel as well. There's no cost to it, and it makes it much easier to find my content, so make sure to do that as well before you leave. I wanted to thank a couple of groups of people. First, my patrons on Patreon are my core group of supporters. They not only provide me with some financial help, they also have created this lovely environment over there where we can all kind of share ideas and show each other what we're working on and share resources. And it's a nice learning environment. They've created a pretty cool artistic community, and I appreciate that. Thanks for doing that. The other group are my YouTube subscribers, and we just passed 29,600, which is amazing. Thank you for that. The comment section on YouTube is really nice. I get lots of lovely comments from people, and I do appreciate that. I particularly like learning how you got into metalsmithing, and when you share your tricks with me, I learn so much from you guys, and I do appreciate that as well. And I hope some of the other people who read the comments pick up some of the cool tips that you leave as well. Thanks for that. Thanks for the financial contributions like the Buy Me a Coffees and the Super Thanks and the merch purchases, as well as the ebook purchases. All of those things make my channel sustainable, and I couldn't do it without your help, so thank you for that. The video description down below has some important links. There's a link to my Patreon if you're going to find out more about that community. It has a link to my newest ebook, which is a guide to 2025's tutorials. I did over 170, so there's a page for each one that has a link to the video, as well as additional information, including a picture of the sketch that I drew, a final outcome picture, a list of materials that it took to make the project, stone information if there's a stone in it, a difficulty rating, as well as a notes section where I write down some things I didn't think about during the process of making it, but I thought about afterwards. Things I might do different, or what I learned from it, or did I like the outcome or not, and why. So stuff like that can be useful to you as well, so you can learn from my mistakes and my experiments. So it's a really great way to have a whole bunch of new projects to try, as well as a nice way to support my channel. You can even get all 3 years that I did, 2023, 2024, and 2025, as a package deal if you go to the merch store and look for the tab where you get all 3 for a single price. That's $15 off of the total, so it's worth it, I think. Check it out. Thanks for coming today. Take care. Happy silversmithing.